meeting is, because I kind of like to join it with the UA.
Yeah, for sure. So it'll be tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. And it'll be through this same channel most likely.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I feel like it would make more sense through this channel since it's the Constitutional Committee. But I mean, either one's fine. Like, I'm not super stressed about which one. Yeah.
Right. Well, we are now streaming on all things, so we can probably go ahead and start.
All right. Well, so is what can folks what they can see is the Constitution screen?
Yes.
Like for the people being streamed. Okay, cool. Sounds good. Then yeah, we can go ahead and get started. I appreciate the couple folks that were able to join us for this conversation. I understand the week after Thanksgiving is very busy trying to make sure you have all your schoolwork. So I understand if people aren't able to show up. That's why we're recording this. But we do really appreciate the people that are here present with us. With that being said, we are mostly going to be doing a brief rundown of what this new constitution looks like, so that by the time we review it on Wednesday in full Senate, we don't necessarily have to spend a long time with unnecessary details that we could cover in these sessions. And the point of it is to just make sure that everyone knows what's coming through, let folks see each title and each section and just give their inputs on whether it's fine or whether we might have missed a point or maybe we can modify some things. But in general, just to let y'all know, this constitution got reviewed by 4 committees. Each of the committees reviewed the part that was assigned to them based on their committee charges, and then the Rights Committee did review the whole document, and it did get approved in the 4 committees. Of course, there were still, especially in the Rights Committee, some good points brought up that are worth considering. So we will look them over today, just so that we hopefully get it passed on Wednesday with not too much trouble. And without too much trouble doesn't mean without conversation. Of course, we're going to have conversations about it, but you know what I mean. All right, so the first part of, well, Ethan, do you have anything you would like to say, or Wesley, or anyone in this call before we jump in?
I believe you covered it quite well, at least for, a start off to the document. I mean, it is going to be a very long thing to review as we go through this video here, but hopefully we will be able to make it concise enough for people to sort of get the bare bones of the document without having to read all of the qualifications of it.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. All right, thank you. Then I think we can go ahead and get started. With these preamble, I personally don't think we need to spend too much time since a lot of it stays the same. But in this part, we're basically just stating what our purpose of existing is, what we're supposed to be advocating for, just where our authority comes from, and stuff like that. So it's just kind of like an introduction into what we as an organization are supposed to achieve, and then after the preamble comes the specific ways in which we shall achieve these goals. Of course, feel free to read them individually, and if you feel like we're missing one or one shouldn't necessarily be here, let us know. But basically we start with Title I, which are the general provisions. General provisions are very important because they're just necessary information and terminology that are necessary for us to run smoothly and for us to interpret this whole document without too many different interpretations. So we're, especially with vocabulary, with certain terms, we're just clarifying what they mean, and we're also trying to just bring all the points that are important for folks to know when it comes to the functionality of Senate. So how our Senate is divided, we can see here, our branches of government. We also brought to the front the Student Senate Code of Ethics. This Code of Ethics has always existed. It was just very, very hidden in our previous SSRR, and it was just in a very weird place that didn't really make sense. So we put it in the general provisions now, so that it's like one of the first things that senators can see. We go over like excused absences. We are, you know, flexible people. So like whenever you have a specific reason to not be present, it's just a matter of reaching out. And here we're like just trying to make all these things as clear as possible so that there's not a lot of confusion when folks like have to skip a Senate or something. And for quorum, we are still requiring 1/2 of the current voting members, but we are asking everyone, like everyone basically, as is expected, is counted towards the quorum. In the past, you know, everyone's always been counted for the quorum, but graduate students weren't required to come, whereas now they are like attendance is mandatory for grad students, so that'll change a little bit things here with the quorum. We also put all the way to the front accessibility, you know, anyone that needs any specific accommodations put forward for them, they can request them to the Internal Affairs Director, and they shall make these accommodations possible. And these were like all these points that are so important weren't so clear in the previous document, so bringing them here just makes it easier for folks. Of course, we enlist other documents that help with this constitution, like policy manual, just the code of student conduct and stuff like that. We also explain, you know, that we are using Robert's Rules of Procedure, just like which wasn't really super clear in the past. And finally, we have in these general provisions just a bunch of definitions. These definitions haven't changed from the previous document, but they're necessary, as I said. So like, what is a first-year undergraduate student? What is a division? What is a, you know, off-campus? What is an international student? What is considering a candidate, a polling site, etc. So these are just, yeah, necessary terms that are good to know and have in mind. But that is the first title. There are 10 titles we're going to go through. And this one is the general provisions, and the second one is the legislative branch. So again, like we put the general provisions at the very front because they're just general knowledge that is useful for the entire document, and it applies for all of it. And then it continues with the legislative branch, which is like our largest branch here in the Senate. So all senators are part of the legislative branch. And we are basically, you know, explaining where our powers come from, how it is divided into different committees and into like the Students' Assembly. Just like to clarify some stuff, currently in Student Senate, we use the term committees to refer to like our standing student committees. So like finance, rights, university affairs, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we also use the term full Senate when we are all meeting together. These two terms are going to change because of many reasons, but it was just a lot of confusion when it came to like what committee versus a subcommittee versus a board versus like all these things. So to make terminology clearer, we're calling our standing committees councils. So instead of being the finance committee, it's the finance council. And then instead of being the full Senate when we all meet together, it's going to be called the Students' Assembly. And first of all, calling it a Students' Assembly is just making it way more clear what we do. We are, you know, a body of students that's meeting up to represent other students here on campus. And that is not something that's very clear with the term full Senate. If a student that has no idea what Student Senate is reads the term full Senate, they might have no idea what that is making reference to, or have any idea that they as a student can, you know, show up to these full Senate meetings. So we're calling it the Students' Assembly because even if a student doesn't know about Student Senate, they can hear, oh, wow, look, there's a Students' Assembly. This means, you know, that students are allowed to be in this space, and I like you can infer that it's a place where you can advocate for certain things and stuff like that. So throughout this whole document, whenever you hear Students' Assembly, it's kind of the equivalent to our current full Senate. And when you hear councils, it's the equivalent to our current standing committees. And so, yeah, here we are explaining a little bit more about the senators that are going to be, part of the legislative branch. And we have created 2 different categories for senators, which makes it much more easier organizationally. We have academic student senators and we have community student senators. And so the main difference here is that academic student senators are, as you may expect, people that represent their school. So you can be a senator for the School of Business, a senator for engineering, law, etc. And this also involves like international students, so international and graduate and undergraduate, and as well, of course, non-traditional students. But these all fit under academic student senators, and these seats are always elected, or once a seat is vacated, there's a specific replacement senator process, which is stated here when someone is not present. But on the other hand, we have community student senators. These senators are appointed by organizations, by specific organizations, mostly identity and multicultural related organizations. And so this is just, a lot of times folks that are in these organizations feel like senators, academic senators, might not be doing good enough advocacy or are not representing the members of their community adequately. So that's why we have these ones here. Any organization that is considered like identity or multicultural can request to have a senator seat. And the same, if they don't want a seat anymore, they can remove it. But that is kind of how it's gonna look like in terms of like the division for senators. We also have, of course, on campus, off campus, the associate senators that are elected by all the councils. We have the holdover senators. And here we also explain just how each senator seat is going to be divided by numbers. And I can't emphasize enough how much more clearer this whole section is compared to how it used to be in terms of like knowing how many people are supposed to be in each division, who belongs to like what division, and what constitutes like an off-campus versus on-campus, etc. So it just makes it super, super clear. We're not necessarily changing per se how senator seats are divided. We're just like recategorizing them. We also explain right away, your term in office, you're able to resign if you want. And we also explain here the responsibilities of the senators. And senators mostly, are expected to attend on every Wednesday meeting. They're also expected to be part of student councils. This has been a problem this year where senators think they can come to full Senate, but they're not obliged to come to student council meetings. But, this is making it clear that they are expected to be in council meetings. Outreach, of course, like being in contact with folks in your constituency. Trainings involve all social justice trainings and legislative trainings, and these usually happen at the beginning of the semester. And finally, student fee research and advocacy. So this is like a new responsibility that we're adding to senators, and it is mostly for senators to be more involved with the process of, revising different fees that go towards different services and determining, just throughout the year based on research, based on, even students' own interest, just be able to make proper recommendations and suggestions to the people that are now going to be in charge of like, I guess, overseeing the fee and making the proper adjustments for it year with year. Ethan, would you say that explains this new section here, or would you like to add anything else?
I think I'll really touch on that probably when we get to the executive branch, because I think that, reading that out will probably tie it back pretty easily.
Oh, sounds good. Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Then with that being said, so we have here the responsibilities, And right after responsibilities, we have disciplinary procedures and removal. So for whenever you're not fulfilling your responsibilities stated here, then we have a very clear disciplinary and removal procedure, so every senator can be fully aware of what will happen in case they're not sticking to their responsibilities, or in case they're violating the code of ethics or something of the sort. But yeah, so this explains both kind of on our end and on the senator's end what it looks like, what the process looks like, and what you can do to appeal the decision, and stuff like that. And also we have replacement procedures. So basically, when a seat gets vacated, what do we have to do to fill it back in? We have the types of legislation here. We explain real clearly and easy what the different options are for you as a senator to write legislation and what legislation does. How legislation is, the whole process from when you come up with an idea to when you draft a resolution to when you send it to the chief of staff, and then what happens after that. So how the legislation will get distributed to different committees, different councils, as well as, what is expected from the people that wrote it, for example. So presenting the legislation in the council, what needs to happen, what the process is for it to be considered in a council, and once it is being considered in a council, what constitutes an eligible legislation. So what makes us available, allowed to approve or not approve legislation.
Oh, and Umberto, if you could go up real quick here. We've also modified how legislation is submitted to the chief of staff to sort of encourage folks to write legislation, even if they just have starting ideas on the legislation, because the legislation now just must be sent to the chief of staff using any sort of modifiable Microsoft document by 5 p.m. But it may still be edited until it has been presented in the student council to which it was referred, because that will essentially present the most up-to-date version of the legislation to the council there on that Wednesday night. And so that creates a bit more of an opening for people to propose legislation and sort of encourage that writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a really great point. That was worth mentioning. And hopefully this makes more senators want to feel more comfortable drafting legislation, as Ethan said. But yeah, and then finally, how legislation is approved. So these steps here are they are made as clear as possible, because we understand how intimidating and confusing it can be to propose legislation or write it as a senator. So by making the 4 points here super clear, from when you start to when you're presenting to whether your legislation is eligible or not, and as well as how it gets approved and how much people it needs to get approved and stuff like that. And Article 10 goes over the Students' Assembly, so the equivalent of our current full Senate. And our current governing document does not really include anything about how full Senate meetings are supposed to be handled, besides just explaining the hierarchy of leading the meeting. But there wasn't necessarily any guidelines as to what exactly we do, what is expected from the assembly, what is expected from the different people in the assembly, and who's supposed to be there, who's not, and stuff like that. So we are adding all that section here from Article 10, Students' Assembly. We go over speaking and voting rights, general responsibilities. We have, we explain a little bit what the interim agenda looks like, consent agenda, the regular agenda, which are necessary in the flow of the debate. And yeah, just legislative responsibilities, responsibilities of the leadership. And so this here will help everyone be on the same page when full Senate comes, or the Students' Assembly, sorry, because then we will know exactly what's senators are supposed to be doing, but also what exec and like the leadership is supposed to be doing. The same is the case with the student councils. We just added very specific, sections explaining speaking and voting rights, general responsibilities, legislative responsibilities, and then leadership.
I'd like to interrupt real quick to ask to see if you're able to see Holly's messages.
Oh,
Response right now, but we can probably just address it since you brought it up. Yeah, Holly, we can see your messages. So if you want to post that friendly that you'd like to put in, please feel free to do so.
Oh, well, I don't know if, can she hear that?
Yeah, she could probably, I would say. Oh, you know what? You're right. She couldn't hear that. Oh.
Yeah, I don't think so because she's not in the call.
Yeah.
So yeah, just
I'll message back to her.
Yeah, message. Thanks, Wesley. And they're in the same order. So the responsibilities of the Students' Assembly and the responsibilities of the student councils are in the exact same order, and they have the exact same sections. So general responsibilities, legislative responsibilities, responsibilities of the leadership, and it explains here very clearly what each leader position is supposed to do. And then we have each article explaining the individual charges of each committee. Over here, we define, like, each charge isn't really like modified too much. It's just made much more clear and straightforward. We have the same speaking and voting rights, general responsibilities, responsibilities of the leadership, and then we have other committees within the council that are important. So we have the campus fee review committee, and it goes the same: speaking and voting rights, the purpose, function, recommendations, just like, which is something they do. And then we have meetings and hearing schedule, just everything very clear, straightforward. The same with the DEI Council, which is now going to be called the Social Justice Council. And we are bringing, we're just bringing the DEI Fund board to be here in a more clear and straightforward way than it was. So we're explaining, membership and all of that, a function, everything that needs to be known about that specific subcommittee. And that goes all the I'm kind of like just zooming through this because these regulations didn't change per se. They're just more nicely written and more organized. And finally, besides the DIB board, we have the Eof Fund. So this will also be under the DI committee, and we have the Director of Diversity or Social Justice that's going to just be heading the EOF here, but same, it didn't really change much. And here we run into this, I would say, a little bit just more controversial council, because currently these are two separate councils. It's the Student Rights Council and the University Affairs Council. And for many reasons, and I'm gonna just run them through real quick, we thought it would be a good idea to merge these two committees, considering the trend we are seeing post-COVID and just general student engagement in the committees, and what each committee is supposed to be doing. We realized that a lot of the charges really overlapped, but as a Senate, we in many cases feel like we're spreading ourselves too thin. We are very quick to create many committees, many boards, many councils, ad hocs, whatever, but it's very, very hard sometimes to maintain those groups engaged or have people be constant and putting like a lot of energy into it. So we thought it would be a good idea if two committees that have overlapping charges and which could be working together to, fulfill their own goals. And like when you think about it, Finance Committee has the fee review subcommittee, which is an enormous like task and power that is given to him. On the other hand, the DEI committee, which will be the Social Justice Council, also has, you know, they already have the DEI fund, and they also have the EOF. So again, it's already a lot of power that they have and a lot of like tools that they have to enact policy. Whereas Rights and UA, although they had very similar charges in terms of like, you know, their role on advocating for students and their well-being and that their rights are respected, you know, in housing and dining and like whatever it is, but they didn't have necessarily like a super important subcommittee or sub-organ like finance and DEI do. So by bringing these two committees together, we're hoping to like give more power to these councils to do their charges, to fulfill their missions, and just to be more coordinated in their efforts to just to help students. Now, tomorrow at 6:30 p.m., we will be meeting with members of the University Affairs Council. We did meet with Rights members, but we still have to meet with UA members. And so we're going to have this conversation tomorrow with them on just what their thoughts are about this merger. If, you know, if they think for one reason or another, this would be better left like as it is with 4 committees, or if they think it's a good idea to merge. We will see that tomorrow, but in general, we believe this is, logistically speaking, and in terms of efficiency and in terms of our ability to serve students, this might be the best way forward. Ethan, is there anything you would like to add to that, or?
The only other thing I would add as well for the Rights and Affairs Council is the housing and dining rates affiliation to it, since we are currently working on like what the relationship of like housing governance organizations wants to have with the Student Senate governing organizations. And so that might be something that comes under review on Wednesday as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. We did add those stipulations, and so that also like is giving this council a lot more weight into important decisions. So yeah, and with that we conclude the Title II, which I apologize, it is a very, very long title, but we are done with it, and with that we can move to Title III, which is the executive branch, and I'm going to let Ethan take over for this part. And yeah, I guess there's no one here to pause for questions, but feel free to rewind the video, I guess, if you have questions, or email us.
Oh yeah, def email us. So do you just want me to go through it as you scroll?
Yeah, my bad. I forgot I was kind of controlling here.
Okay, so the start of the executive branch article talks about the Student Executive Council, what you would know as Studex now. This is really the highest governing committee of the Student Senate because it is the one that combines not only the executive leaders of our student government, but as well like the legislative chairs, the Senex representatives get elected in what is now the Students' Assembly. All of those bodies contribute to making a sort of like upper governing structure of the Student Senate there. As you can see, it shows the membership and whether or not those members have voting or non-voting rights in that membership. If you scroll down, Umberto. Did you scroll?
Oh, I'm scrolling. Is it not scrolling in your screen?
No, it's frozen.
What about now?
Nothing.
Really?
Do you wanna?
Nothing yet?
Do you wanna share it and unshare it and see? Oh, now it carried the lag up.
Oh,
okay.
So can you see it moving now?
Yeah, move it back up to, I think, attendance. All right, attendance is the one that's under the function, or not the function, the membership, right? Perfect.
Yeah.
This is the attendance structure of the Student Executive Council. It's remaining mostly the same. It just adds stipulations for like who can act as a proxy for meetings, how those proxies can be appointed. The current regulations for Senex representatives is that they have to be members of the University Senate delegation. That has been maintained. And then we also have the same attendance policy of 4 absences of any kind within 1 term shall be qualification for suspension of a member. But it has been made more clear because I've also just put functionally the power that they can defer action on suspension if it is a case where they deem it necessary for extenuating circumstances. And that was weirdly structured in the original document, but it's sort of been more like homogeneously produced there. So function here remains exactly the same, that we will continue to do the agenda for students' assembly sessions, that we'll consult the chancellor and other administrators when necessary for those recommendations. Oh, Umberto, you're scrolling up. Oh, back up. Perfect. And then the compromise committee structure, that is basically just stipulating that if amendments come into the process of this document, that we'll have chairs basically bringing whatever thing the committee did to amend a document, when in this case would be a council sending an amendment to the Student Executive Council. And so what that'll look like is what we're seeing currently, where student rights had brought up remuneration for the legislative branch. That's going to be an amendment that gets considered in full Senate because it was brought up and generated in that committee. Then the next one is break procedures. These are just special powers that the Student Executive Council holds for reasons of just needing to carry on the business of the Student Senate. Umberto, if you want to scroll down. All right, and you see these break procedures pretty much just indicate that during like breaks in the winter session, the summer session, that Studex can exercise these following special powers. Nothing has really changed except we've sort of modified procedures to make it to where members have to be informed. That originally wasn't put in for these special power uses, but for transparency's sake, I thought it must be something that should be transmitted through the listserv and or the teams. And it also defines like what legislation may be produced. For example, we had to pass the fee package because it's something of urgent financial need for the Student Senate. And that could be passed by the Senate in one scenario for the campus fee, but for the block allocation stipulations that were modified, that had to be passed by Studex to address the financial issues because we had to operate since Senate could not reach quorum for that meeting. Then next you'll have the procedures for when Studex acts as a student council. This is pretty much the exact same as well. It just basically defines like how they'll act, how they cannot amend legislation as it's been generated, because that would sort of disqualify it as like a compromise committee action. And then it also details what can be done to generate legislation, especially when Senate is in regular session. Then you have the hierarchy, which is very much just like the division of like who gets to become chair. Then, all right, next you have the president's cabinet. This just basically defines what the exec staff is and the members of the cabinet, the ones that can be fired versus the ones that have to be like specifically impeached. You see oversight of the cabinet is under the president, which is what is currently seen now. And for job duties, they're responsible for filling the duties as described in Title III, which is the current title that we're in the Constitution. And then Section 5 here, you'll see is remuneration, and that basically just describes how the pay gets distributed in the executive office here, and how the HR pay gets set from the Student Senate Treasury Office. And then finally, you have disciplinary and removal procedures. This stipulates that, you know, the president has total authority to hire and fire staff, especially if they're not meeting their job description. It also defines the ways in which the Student Senate and or like the Constitutional Court here can take actions for discipline to executive officers, whether that be impeachment or an ethics trial of some sort. And Umberto, if you want to scroll. more description of how the impeachment process goes. That was lifted from the original. However, it was made much more concise and clear to make sure that it was easier to read for folks. Next, you'll basically just have the job descriptions of every single one of the executive officers, whether or not those executive officers have committees and boards that they appoint to on the university level, the university senate level, or the KU student senate level. The president in specifics, we'll see this more towards the end of the executive branch, but they have a new appointment for student senate boards where they are now going to be appointing advocates for certain student fees, but we'll touch upon that later. Umberto, if you want to just scroll through the job descriptions.
Wait, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So why do we have this here? The president shall appoint the following members.
Oh, you know what? I think that was just probably left off.
Oh, is it okay if I just like friendly it out?
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's just like a typo.
All right. Yeah, shows special powers of the president, the vice president for the presiding officer powers, grad student body president, those board memberships. And yeah, this basically is just a way more organized version of what current job descriptions are for a lot of the exec officers, but also builds it around the new constitution as well. Also a change for the CCO in that since there is no longer a Cco Advisory Board under this constitution, it'll basically be a stipulation that the directors who are outgoing are going to be responsible for hiring the incoming directors of that office. And then the transportation coordinator at the end here also remains the same in terms of appointment by the transit commission. Really nothing we felt like we could do to change that since it is sort of like an inter-university governance board. So yeah, that is mostly remained the same with, once again, like the same organizational structure of the other job descriptions.
I have another quick question. In terms of, and that's where, and I mean, this might help clear other folks' minds when they see the video, but when we talk about removing the advisory boards. So I know that, for example, just from what Radia was telling me, the Cco Advisory Board is like enormous, like it has so many folks from different parts, that are not students, that are just kind of everywhere around the university. So how would that look like if we're taking away those advisory boards that have like folks from all around the university? What would they do?
So this is really about giving power back to the students who run these offices and are responsible for looking at these issues on campus. So when it comes to something like the Cco Advisory Board, for example, what we would encourage is that essentially it's now not going to be regulated by the student senate, but the CCO can do internalized policies to make it to where they have that advisory board that advises them on issues of community service in the community. And that can still be maintained. They can still maintain that rapport with those organizations. It's just not going to be on an officialized level in the student senate document, because what it would allow basically for the CCO is more independence in operations so that they can reach out to more parties than can be stipulated in the document, since the document is quite honestly more slow moving than the impact of several new social justice organizations in Lawrence, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, that makes total sense. Thank you.
All right, continue on down. And I think just scroll to the Campus Fee Advisory Board. Yes. So this is the new board. When we talk about the removal of a lot of student senate advisory boards and how those work within the student governance structure, we've seen basically throughout the year that we haven't been able to get a lot of outreach for students on these board memberships. And so the response to that is essentially tailoring student government to the sort of engagement of the students in that governance organization, but also to create a sense of accountability for those structures. So as you can see, the purpose here is responsible for assessing the student services and entities that are funded through the campus fee. Board members are also named trustees of the campus fee they help to manage, and the policy director shall serve as chair of this advisory board since they are going to be responsible for creating the Student Senate platforms here. The Student Advisory Board shall consist of the following members with corresponding fee trusteeships: the policy director, the treasurer for the student org fee and EOF fee. The president of the University of Kansas Memorial Board or their proxy can appoint a student union fee and student union activities fee advisory. The student health advocate will oversee the student health fee. The child care advocate will oversee the Hilltop Child Development fee. And this is where you see a replacement of the president and committees appointing people to these boards. And instead it's going to be an advocate that can help him manage structures of like Senate involved members to like help and research the fee. And it really continues on. You'll just basically see that there are folks from several different Senate organizations, Senate standing councils, and those advocates mixed into the ranks there. And then you have section 3 function. This board shall meet once a month to discuss the impact of services funded by the campus fee on the student body. Each board member shall be tasked with the following, and you'll see specifically like what they're supposed to be doing as like a student fee advocate or someone who is also just a member of that board. And then you have the job descriptions of the student advocates on student fees, and those can be relayed through here as well. And that's basically just taking what those committees originally did as their charges and placing them as the new job descriptions of those new executive people. And as you saw the stipulation of senator responsibilities originally up there, that's where you're going to start seeing that basically senators are going to be assigned under one of these folks, depending on like the fee that they would like to research throughout the year. And that's just basically going to be appointed by the policy director in future so that we can make sure that each fee gets an equal opportunity to research, student service, and seeing like what the efficacy is of maintaining that fee, increasing or lowering it. And so, yeah, that will be what this essentially does to replace those advisory boards and put it into one sort of like supreme advisory board in that sense, to where students will be able to discuss that across those different services. All right, and it looks like we're at Title 4. If you'll excuse me, I'm just gonna go take a drink of water before I start this one.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Okay, well, my roommate also brought me tea, so that was a double. Okay, going on to the judicial branch here. So Article 1, first of all, I guess I just want to stipulate here that this is now an official writing of the judicial branch for the student government. Originally, the regulations were basically 1 page long, and then everything else basically were just like the trial court and the appeals court can create their own regulations as like was stipulated in the Student Senate rules and regulations. However, that was not really clear because essentially you had to go to a whole other document and it really was just the trial court regulations of the Student Senate. But what this does is it puts it all in the title so that we know clearly like what Student Senate judiciary arbitration processes look like. So you see the authority, all judicial power is held by the Constitutional Court of the Student Senate. Judicial power extends to all challenges seeking enforcement of, interpretation of, or compliance with the Student Senate Constitution or legislation that we have enacted under the Students' Assembly. Appointment, basically, it's going to be a presidential appointment. This is to replace the 11 sender appointment system that was originally put in the last constitutional update. And that's just for simplicity's sake, because it's a lot easier to fill the court with that. And it also holds like the same role of making sure that the legislative and the executive branch both have a strong say in shaping the judicial branch of the student government. You can see the president can appoint it, but with consultation of the vice president and the grad student body president. And as well, it has to get consent of up to 4/5 of the members present and voting of the students' assembly. And another new thing is, instead of having quote unquote a lifetime term to the court, students who are appointed are now going to basically hold 2-year terms, and then a 2-term limit shall be enforced, basically holding up to like a 4 years in the court is going to be sort of your end to the game there. Section 3 is remuneration. All members of the KU Student Senate Court shall be allocated a stipend of $250 at the end of the election schedule. This is sort of to replace the sort of archaic mindset in student government that we've had, that justices should be doing this on a volunteer basis and not necessarily be paid for their labor, but we're looking to expand that in terms of student senate governance into the judicial and legislative branches equally. Article 2 here is the organization of the courts, and basically just defines the role, especially of like the chief administrators of those courts. That would be the chief magistrate of the Constitutional Court and the chair of the Student Elections Commission. They'll be responsible for setting up the social media accounts, registering the courts as a Silk student organization, maintaining and approving use of the elections closet, which is going to be brought up more closely in the elections code. Coordinating to accomplish tasks throughout the year in an effective and efficient manner, ensuring that each court is completing its assigned tasks and nothing more. And if a case is delivered to a student senate court that does not have jurisdiction over the matter, they shall work to send this case to the appropriate court. Next is specific description of the Constitutional Court. Its original jurisdiction is basically any cases involving the Constitution or legislation enacted by the Senate. Any matters that concern Title VI and or Title VIII of the Constitution shall basically be excluded from this original jurisdiction, as that'll be something that's handled by the Elections Commission. You see membership of the court basically held the same as the Court of Appeals. Those 3 members are going to be transitioned over. Special responsibilities of the Constitutional Court shall be to basically just routinely review legislation as is appropriate throughout the semester to make sure it's constitutional after being authorized by the Students' Assembly and President. Then they should also be the court of first and final redress if a University of Kansas student believes that a student senate official or body has overstepped their authority and or committed a violation of the Constitution of the Student Senate. And then describing what that decision process will look like. Next here you have the Student Elections Commission. They have the responsibility of managing the Student Senate elections. In their name there, really, it's basically held as like the same thing as what the trial court had to do during Student Senate elections last semester, but with, of course, the additional responsibilities placed upon the new elections code this year. If you could scroll down, Umberto. Then finally here for the remainder here, you have the rules of procedure for Student Senate judicial proceedings. Any student with standing may file a case with the Constitutional Court regarding an issue arising within the jurisdiction of the Constitutional Court or the Student Elections Commission. Notice a change in language there, that now it's only going to be students who can bring cases to these courts. Originally, there were stipulations that basically any corporation, entity, anything outside of the student government could bring something to the Senate. But this is something that we have sort of taken out because we don't believe that students who are sort of arbitrating these matters within student government should have to handle something to that high of a degree, especially if it starts to get outside of the student senate realm of things. So now that's been changed to basically make it to where it's a student court system for very specific student purposes. This is basically the same rules of procedure that were in those outside regulations, but they've now been placed within the interior of the document. And what this does is basically just outlines the proceedings of student senate trials in that sense. And so what that will look like is essentially this is a homogeneous structure of like what will happen in every single meeting of a student senate court. So Umberto, if you could just scroll through. It's really just procedural things. And, you know, if you have any questions or concerns about like sort of like what's made into these courts, I think that's valid to sort of read through them and sort of determine semantically what you think is appropriate. Hearing procedure. This is basically speaking order stuff for the court sessions. And then the final article really just clarifies what the Student Senate courts can do as rulings. The basis that Student Senate court rulings should primarily utilize a well-argued interpretation of the Constitution of the University of Kansas Student Senate in relation to cases that are presented to the court. They retain the right to use past precedent from previous Senate judicial entities, and exterior arguments related to the American or any other legal system may be used while crafting a judicial opinion. However, it should be considered secondary to the arguments relating to Student Senate documents and precedent, since we want to make sure that really these courts are adjudicating things like with Student Senate documents primarily. The opinions that can be issued are unanimous and majority opinions. When the court delivers a majority opinion, any dissenting justice or judge must deliver a dissenting opinion. And then basically just describes how the appeals process can go for the University Judicial Board if their appeal is grounded in like procedural issues with the trial. And then the public posting of Senate court rulings, which will be done sort of like on the behalf of the Student Senate court's accounts. So yeah. And with that, I'm going to tag you back in, Humberto, for the budget code.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a great explanation of our exec branch as well as our judicial branch. Thank you so much, Ethan. And yeah, as Ethan said, like feel free to ask any questions if you have any. You can send them our way through email, or you can, of course, make them a full Senate if you'd like. But with that, we can move on to our next title, which is Title 5. So Title 5 is a budget code, and we are more than halfway through the Constitution. These next titles are a little bit shorter than the first ones, just because, of course, the first ones explain the bulk of what Senate is. So these ones will be a little bit shorter, but for the most part, I just want to say that the budget code was not reformed in any way, mostly, except some minor changes that have been proposed during this semester. So currently, per request of our treasurer, the budget code, considering it is our regulation for how we give out funds to folks, it was just better not to really mess with it too much. So we basically made it as clear as possible, organized, structured, very straightforward, so that everyone knows exactly what we're allowed and not allowed to fund. It kind of just makes clears the way for there not being too many misinterpretations or just confusion, especially since so many different guidelines for funding were in different parts of our governing document and not all of it was in the budget code. But now we are correcting that and making it just super simple and straightforward. But yeah, so and as I was mentioning, like it is all the same. There were just some minor changes. So, but these changes, they weren't like made by us thinking about it. They were made by the Student Senate throughout the semester. They're mostly amendments regarding our ability to fund for scholarships, our ability to just like give food for subscriptions. Funding for food or subscriptions and stuff like that. So, so that's the whole bulk of the budget code. As you can see, like you can literally go back to SSRR and look how most of these regulations are written, and you'll see that just this format is much, much easier to follow, and much clearer.
I would also just I would also just add that it, as Humberto alluded to, removes a lot of the exemptions that you would see in other parts of the Constitution, such as the appendices in current SSRR, and places everything here within the budget code. So it really helps to make sure that these rules are like well written and like easy to process for students who are seeking those funding opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great point. And hopefully that will just solve so many issues on like not knowing where to find where a certain regulation is about a certain funding guideline. It really was super weird the way our current SSRR is organized. But again, we continue here. Regulations, funding usage, everything, it is pretty much the same. Some, terminology corrections, some referral corrections. So, of course, the budget code was making reference to a bunch of articles that didn't exist or appendices that weren't there anymore. So, as Ethan said, this is just making that much simpler and putting it all under the budget code. And and with that, we finished Title 5 and we move on to Title 6, which did have some very important changes. So I'm going to let Ethan take over again, and they'll be able to just guide us through it.
Gosh, I had a very short reprieve.
Yeah, sorry, the budget code really
Okay, so the elections code here. So really sort of just defining like what student senate elections would like to have as its purpose. Wow, Umberto, I'm
going to go to the restroom real quick, but I'll be right
all right,
back.
I'm having trouble seeing on the version you zoomed into.
Oh, sorry. I was like, maybe if I zoom out, there'll be no need to scroll down so quick. But yeah, I'll literally be back in 30 seconds, so I'll just scroll down.
All right, brilliant. Sounds good. So let's look at this. Article 1, the purpose and scope. The Student Senate Elections Code shall govern general, freshman, special, and recall elections, as well as any referenda that happens to pop up for special elections throughout the year. This elections code shall be construed to promote a fair, free, and equitable electoral process. All candidates in student senate elections basically will agree to follow this elections code and accept the consequence or consequences of potentially violating any part of the code. It also stipulates the special obligations of the Student Elections Commission that was referenced earlier in the Judicial branch of the Student Senate. They must conduct the Student Senate elections here in the spring, as well as the first year elections in the fall. The Student Senate Elections Commission shall be the body in charge of reviewing enrollment figures. That's basically sort of the amount of students that are in whatever college, whether that be the School of Engineering, the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, stuff like that, and sort of distributing the amount of senator seats, in this case being 64 for academic constituencies, to sort of equalize that across the university. And I believe, like, as you saw earlier in the legislative branch, each school is at least guaranteed 2 of those. The Student Elections Commission shall maintain registration, financial, and campaign activity records for all candidates. They shall create a declaration of candidacy form and campaign spending report form, shall annually prepare a schedule showing all of the specific deadlines for the election. They must propose revisions to the election schedule to the Chief of Staff of the Student Senate if that's necessary. The chair must plan, prepare, and hold candidate debates. And finally, they must deliver the certified official election results to the Student Senate Staff Assistant and the Vice Provost for Student Affairs. Then we get into the election schedule. So this really is pretty much the exact same schedule that you would see under the current elections code. And there shall be basically 2. Oh, awesome. That was amazing timing, actually. So there are 2 election schedules. That would be the first year election schedule and the spring election schedule. These used to be in separate parts of the elections code, but have now been put together to just ease of viewing, like when election dates will be had. Next, you have the first year fall elections and the description of like who is eligible for those elections to run for office, who is eligible to vote, and then the regulations for that campaigning. Then you have Student Senate spring elections and basically sort of like the same structure of like how do you get qualified for these elections and what can and cannot be done during that election period. So Umberto, if you want to scroll. Okay, and in the spring elections, this is where you also see described like the campaign resource closet. So this new elections code has a larger change to it in that it removes campaign finance entirely from student senate elections and instead creates something known as the campaign resource closet, where all candidates will be allowed to like utilize a common resource closet while running for a student senate office. This closet shall be located in the Senate office and shall include like following items, but not be limited to them. That would be sidewalk chalk, poster board, markers, cardstock, buttons, button maker, accommodation services, reprinting services to print flyers for a candidate's campaign. And then it also creates an exception to allow students to also use KU student housing facilities to print just in case, like, they don't want to trek to the Student Senate office and or don't have access to those Student Senate or to those student housing printing availabilities. So this is really just to create a sense of equity in the elections. There are multiple ideas thrown out of like allowing campaigns to raise funds, to giving candidates funding to run for a student election, to creating this resource closet to make it to where money isn't really as difficult of a thing to utilize in the election. And really it qualifies like a lot of the things that campaigns would want to do for a student election anyway. A lot of these elections are ran on social media now and have sort of like minimal but like still present physical availability on campus. So we hopefully think this will be a better option for elections in the future. And then as you can see, basically campaign finance, we prohibit outside funding because of this Student Senate common resource to sort of create fairness in that. And that if you are going to basically utilize outside resources and or funding in a way that is misconstrued from this code, you will be disqualified from the election that you're taking place in. The next article here describes the selection of the grad student body president. After discussing with grad students like what they would like to do for an election and or selection process for the grad student body president, they mostly favored like the sort of like job interview process that is currently had for the grad student body vice president. So this is basically just placing that in the elections code to stipulate like how that will be selected into the future there. And then we have general campaigning regulations. A lot of these didn't change, really just making it to where like it's things that Student Senate has the integrity to enforce. Originally, there was a regulation, for example, of student housing restrictions, basically saying that like candidates have to get permission from student housing, but then next is saying you have to get permission from the property owner to basically place all of these campaign flyers and stuff like that. So basically we've just taken out that part and left it to basically, private properties. Student housing is a private property, so it was just a weird regulation to have over that. Umberto, if you could go down. Digital campaigning mostly remains the same. In fact, in this elections code, it's become a lot easier to do digital campaigning through messaging, social media, emails, etc. We've now removed a lot of the qualifications to basically stop campaigning on the day of the elections or the week of the elections. We thought that that was sort of a dumb rule because really, how do you get people voting in an election other than, campaigning throughout the election to get them to vote for you? So we think this will just make things a lot easier and hopefully advance turnout in future elections here instead of restricting us.
I just want to add real quick, and we can see that like very clearly from when this stipulation got added, because this didn't used to be a thing. Like you used to be able to campaign up until like the end of the elections, and turnout had been improving throughout the years. But the moment they introduced this new regulation where it prohibits like folks to campaign during elections, it like turnout really went down, because regardless of how much you're campaigning a week before, if at like the actual moment of voting you are not going out there like telling people why they should vote for you, nobody's gonna vote. So like we can see, like we know this stipulation affected turnout considerably, so like we are really hoping, as Ethan said, that this will increase turnout just overall. Besides other things that Ethan will touch upon that we've realized could be great tools for increasing participation, such as the referendums and stuff like that. But that'll just come forward. But I just wanted to it's not just that we're coming up with these ideas randomly. Like a lot of them, we've been able to review their effects after multiple years in use.
Yeah, thank you for that, Umberto. Going on, campaign tabling, campaign chalking, basically allowing candidates to do what they want on campus, and seek permission from, the people who are going to be like allowing them to table or campaign in those spaces. Election ballot and process, basically just stipulating what the elections ballot is going to look like and sort of the dates for distributing that ballot. Umberto, if you want to go down. Violation process. So this is basically just stipulating that, the Student Elections Commission, as it was previously stated, has authority over elections code violations. And so what that will look like here is that they are going to be reviewing any cases of people violating this code as is currently present. And then vote, recount, and runoff elections. Basically just the same stipulations that we have now, that if there's a recount or a runoff vote that needs to be had, this is how it will function. Then last here on the elections code, we have student coalitions. This is basically reviving the student coalition system that KU Student Senate had previous to this year. They were sort of kind of taken out in a weird way, like sort of like a limbo situation of being present on like the Student Senate side, but not being within the Student Senate rules and regulations because of how weirdly the new amendments to the document were introduced. Because if you didn't know, like they tried to also do like a full rules rewrite last year, but only the judicial branch and elections code came through and passed the full Senate body. And that created some issues because it created disconnects in a lot of parts of the Student Senate document. And with those disconnects, you sort of gave the judicial branch of Student Senate no choice but to rule that student coalitions were not a thing because they weren't placed in the new elections code. But this sort of revives them and sort of expands the way in which they can influence student politics throughout the year by giving them the right to organize anytime. So if Humberto, you could scroll down. The right to organize. All students who participate in Student Senate shall have the right to create, organize into, and or join existing student coalitions throughout the academic year. And I'd like to also qualify that you could not join a coalition if you would like to basically be independent from this sort of like requirement here. Student coalition regulations. Any student coalition that would like to be recognized by the Elections Commission and listed on the ballot must fulfill these following requirements: that they must like send a list of affiliated candidates to the Elections Commission to basically have an affiliation list for candidates on the ballot. And then their name must not be obscene, illegal, or hate speech as defined by the Code of Rights and Responsibilities and University of Kansas policy. And then on the right to affiliate, this sort of creates a way in which students can more transparently follow politics on the university side. Members of the Student Senate have the right to have their student coalition affiliation listed next to their name on any Student Senate website, form, or document. This includes voting records. And if a student senator would like to update their affiliation at any point, they shall inform the Internal Affairs Director via email. And so this allows students to basically have a way in which they can sort of like have partisanship within student politics. And I know that people often relay that as a negative thing and sort of like creating division in a body that is supposed to be efficient and responding to the needs of students. But really, when we look at like what the Student Senate is currently comprised of, we are lost in terms of like what students are wanting, what students are needing on campus. There's not really a strong sway on our platforms for campus fees one way or the other. It's sort of just a continuity government rather than a government that seeks change each year. So what this will allow is basically students to get into groups that sort of define what they would like to advocate for in student government and like what they would like to see increase throughout the year, but also to, you know, create those divisions that students can visibly see that when they're going to student election polls, like, yes, this person, I think like their ideas will be like more prominent in my mind for like the university into the future. Or, you know, another coalition that may align more with your values. It's sort of like creating that insight that students just don't have in the student government right now, because if you ask most KU students what's going on the Student Senate level, they respond, "What Student Senate?" And so hopefully this will continue to like make that easier to follow. So yeah.
I have a quick question, and it's not mostly like my question, but I know it might be a doubt that people do bring up, and it's mostly related to how so obviously like there will be political parties that are like kind of like opposition or that express like a lot of dissent on maybe like whatever is brought up by the person in by the people in power. So how could we like assure that, you know, there is of course a basic level of respect like between everyone, but at the same time that people are able to express their disagreements without like feeling like they're gonna be punished or something?
I guess, could I have you clarify that question?
Yeah. Oh, you want do you want me to restate the
Yeah,
question?
can you restate it, I guess, in like a shorter way? Because yeah, I sort of
Yeah.
like got lost in certs.
My bad. I'm just wondering, how could we ensure that there's mechanisms in place that allow disagreement? So like we allow for dissent, we allow for like either a more conservative or a more liberal organization to dissent with something, let's say, the exec board said, would they be able to dissent, of course, in a respectful way? Like there's no need to say harmful stuff, but would groups be able to dissent without necessarily being like having repercussions or
Oh, exactly.
like
And
that?
these safeguards are already in place in the current constitution and in what we've proposed to the Student Senate now. Basically, making sure that, we have that Student Senate code of ethics, that we are going to treat each other respectfully, regardless of what we believe, but then also creating like a standard for like what is harm and what is actualized harm in the Student Senate space. For example, if you weren't using someone's correct pronouns in the Student Senate space, at a certain point, you need to be disciplined for that if you're going to continue to not respect someone's pronouns. If it's a one-off thing, then it can be understood as like an accidental thing, but like, making sort of that line of like respect for like people's identities and then also respect for people's different ideas. And then in terms of like dissent of like student coalitions, it actually brings a really interesting new aspect to student politics, because not only can student coalitions like sort of express that in the debate that we're having regarding legislation in the Student Senate space, because that one is already protected by, me as the vice president being presiding officer and ensuring that that space is safe and comfortable for everyone speaking. But it also creates a space in which student coalitions, since these are going to be like lasting entities, can create social media if they want to sort of like post a disagreement with what the Student Senate administration is doing if they're not in majority power. So does that make sense in terms of like how it could play out in that way?
Yeah, definitely. And then the other just very quick doubt, how could we, so obviously like political parties, a lot of times they're just kind of looking for their own self-interest. So how could we ensure that parties or coalitions, I guess, are truly like advocating for students and not just like looking for their own interests and gains? Which would obstruct progress.
I hope this statement doesn't come off as pessimistic, because it might just a tad. But in terms of like student coalition organization, student voting, stuff like that, when people write legislation, like we sort of have the balance that, you're not going to seek inappropriate, like, for example, financial gains from your position in the Student Senate. But in terms of like political gains made by student coalitions, I don't know if there's any way in which we could restrict or include that, because it's just sort of based upon fundamental human nature of like whatever that student coalition will do, they will do. We do have the protection, that like for Student Senate official emails and social media, that we won't promote anything about the election, especially as it relates to a specific coalition. But other than that, there's really nothing preventing in the current, the new, or I think any system from like student coalitions siding with their own interests, because, often not, like whether or not like those student coalitions have their individual or student interests in mind, like they're going to have the interests of, like whatever ideological tent that they have. Like, for example, if a student coalition is really behind the transportation fee and wants to see that continuously expanded, that's going to be something that's shared amongst all of those members.
Sounds good. Thank you. Those were all the just clarifications I wanted to make sure we're on video.
Brilliant. Title 7, do you want to touch on this, or shall I?
Yeah, I can, I guess, really quick go over it. Shared governance is basically all the things that we have like a responsibility along with other senates on campus. So as you may know, we have the staff senate, we have a faculty senate, and we have a student senate. And so there are certain boards that are only under student senate, but there are others that are, every one of those organizations appoints to. And so that's the case with like shared governance. And so, for example, this involves university senate, boards, and stuff like that, such as the judicial boards, calendar committee, international affairs committee, libraries, etc. And some of them are mostly like through appointments, such as we can see here as the appointment by the student body president. And so these are all boards that they don't depend only on us, but again, we kind of like have a shared responsibility. So we are the student advocates, but then there will be other people present in those. But over here, we're just, again, these were very scattered out throughout our previous document. Over here, we are bringing them all together into like very concise articles and explanations, just, you know, how folks can get elected and stuff like that, and who, in what cases it's appointed versus, you know, in what cases it's selected and stuff like that. We also have here appointments by the vice president and the grad vice president. And the grad VP, they didn't used to appoint folks, but it is definitely a great idea to distribute this workload among the two of them so that the grad press can also have the saying. Do you think that covers it, or is there anything else you would like to add?
The only other part would be the last part on the elected appointments of the Students' Assembly. This is the appointed delegation to the University Senate. It showcases like basically like what the outgoing Senate does and what the incoming Senate does in terms of like what the joint Senate is. And that is like the transition of like the old government and the incoming government. And so what you see here is that we are essentially making it to where you have that stipulation under the shared governance provision.
Sounds good. Yeah, sounds good. That leaves us with two more titles. Three more titles, 8, 9, and 10. Ethan, would you like to review Title 8?
Sure. So Title 8, one of the underutilized titles, in my opinion, in the current document and in the new one. This was mostly transitioned with a lot of the same language as it came over to the new document. You know, students, if they do not want to go through their student senate representatives, even though it is like a far easier process, they can start an initiative petition and submit that to the student senate chief of staff and the student senate courts for consideration if they would like to get legislation on the student senate agenda with immediacy. If you could go down, the petition section is fairly simple in terms of like just basically describing how a petition gets processed. Umberto, if you want to scroll. Awesome. And then next here, you have the procedures for a referendum and how that gets operated under, essentially saying that Student Senate Elections Commission will have authority over like placing referenda for special election or in the next general election or first year election. It also showcases that the Students' Assembly has the right by a 2/3 vote to place any legislation, including student-generated initiatives, upon a referendum ballot to be voted upon by the student body. Then you also see this qualification that referendums are only considered like official if 10% of the eligible student body has voted in that referendum election. So this creates an area in which we could seek sort of insight from the student voice at KU here in determining like what we do with campus fees, student safety, a myriad of issues that we have on campus here. Then we go into Title 9, the archival of records and documents. Umberto, do you want to cover that?
Sorry. Yeah, for sure. So over here, you know, we're basically saying that all of our records shall be, you know, preserved, and it's just explaining like who is responsible for like archiving most of our records, just so that we make sure that any action that is taken in the Senate can be some time found in the future without too much trouble or without feeling like some are in a physical copy versus some are in a digital copy and in different programs that we use, etc. So this is basically saying that everything is to be archived, and they basically this includes like applications, agendas, minutes, voting records, agreements, contracts, just literally anything that we as a student senate share or create or whatever. And then so we have like just in a general idea of how we reserve this. I mean, how we archive, but also more specific on digital records that we maintain. But yeah, I believe that would be it of Title IX. And finally, we have Title X, student fees and obligations to of the KU Senate, Student Senate. And Ethan, if you would like to go over this, I could also go over it if you would like.
Yeah, we can sort of tag team on it. Really, this is just bringing what's currently in the Student Senate document over to the new one. Once again, originally the student fees and contracts were in like separate appendices of the document. However, you know, they're very critical to the operation of the Student Senate, as like one of our greatest responsibilities is distributing an over $25 million student fee every year. And these are those fees, the purposes of those fees and how they get sort of accounted for throughout the year, determined by enrollment, of course. So you'll see basically the description of all the student fees throughout this section here, what they do, and who's entrusted with sort of managing those fees, whether that be someone who's on the Student Fee Advisory Board or someone that's directly involved with managing that fee. But it also creates like an ease of record for like students who like, you know, are researching those fees, whether they be senators or members of the Campus Fee Advisory Board, sort of like deliberative purpose in that. So Umberto, if you want to scroll down to contracts. So yeah, you can just basically see all of the fees as they currently are in the document. A lot of fees. All right, then you have Student Senate contracts. These are contracts entered into under the authority of the president, the treasurer, and the Student Senate in terms of like campus fee discussions, as well as like presidential orders and stuff like that. So this includes, for example, the Burge Union contract, where we're stipulated to pay the Burge Union fee up through 2048. So that's something that Student Senate entered into contract for. And so now we're making sure that those records are basically on the document and very easy to see for people who are coming in. And then sort of like now that you see the appendices are missing from the document, everything that was included in the Student Senate appendices was sort of like brought into the life of the document. Considering that a lot of things were added sort of like without like a proper introduction into the current document of like SSRR, what we've done is we've shaped these documents around some of the things that are in these appendices to make sure that they are included, but, you know, included with a purpose and, you know, written in the appropriate place rather than just being sort of this backlog of the document. With that, I believe I'm finished with this title. Umberto, do you have any comments that you think would be insightful?
Nope, I think that covered it pretty well. And that does conclude with all of our titles in the Constitution.
Brilliant.
All right. Yeah, so if folks have any questions, please feel free to reach out, send them by message, by email, whatever it is. We would love to, you know, answer anything that might come up. And yeah, and I'm sure Ethan, like, we'll probably send like the YouTube link or something, right, for folks to see.
What I'll probably go ahead and do, since I'll be sending the agenda either tonight or tomorrow, is I'll go ahead and send the YouTube link of this discussion with the agenda for full Senate, so that folks have access to it on both ends there through Teams and on the Senate listserv.
Okay, sounds great.
Anything else we want to discuss, I guess, before we hop off the call?
I don't think so. Well, my only question is, would it make more sense to have all these explanations about the fees closer to where we have the fee trustees, or do you think it's fine like all the way at the end?
No, because realistically, the fee subcommittee is under the legislative branch, the Campus Fee Advisory Board's under the executive. I think it's fine where it is in terms of like,
Okay,
you know,
sounds
sort of being like the back end of the document, a lot of like finalities of it.
And it is pretty like straightforward, like, oh yeah, Title 10. Like that's where all of our fees are. Like, yeah, Title 10, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. I don't think there's anything else. As you mentioned previously, we'll have that meeting at 6:30 with members of the University Affairs Committee. Otherwise, if anyone has any questions, feel free to email me at sbvp, as in Student Body Vice President, at ku.edu, and or email Umberto, I believe it's Senate COS,
Yes.
as in Chief of Staff, at ku.edu. So any of those emails can take questions regarding this. This will obviously be on the Senate YouTube, so feel free to peruse that. And yeah, I think we will go